I work as a tour guide, and today I want to tell you something that happened to me a few years ago. Something I still cannot explain to this day. It was 4 years ago, on a routine 7-day tour from Hong Kong to Thailand. I had done this route more times than I could count. Same itinerary, just different faces. That trip was no different, or so I thought. The group had only 25 guests, and everything was running smoothly. No trouble, no complaints. Everyone was polite, punctual, and seemed to be genuinely enjoying themselves. But what happened on the final day has haunted me ever since, making me question the very nature of reality. That morning, the entire group was supposed to gather in the hotel lobby at exactly 7 a.m. to head to the airport. One by one, people came down with their luggage, chatting, scrolling through their phones, doing all the ordinary things people do. But one person didn't appear. A male guest who had been traveling alone. I'll call him Mr. Tran, out of respect for his privacy. At first, I assumed he had simply overslept. It happens. We called up to his room. No answer. Then we went upstairs and knocked on the door. Still nothing. At that point, we asked hotel staff to open the room, just in case something had gone wrong. They unlocked it. The door swung open with a creak. The room was empty. No suitcase. No clothes. Not a single personal item. But the bed. The bed had clearly been slept in. The sheets were rumpled. The pillow still held the impression of someone's head, as though a person had just gotten up and vanished. I started to feel uneasy. We had a schedule to keep and couldn't hold the entire group indefinitely. After a quick discussion, my colleague, we always traveled in pairs, volunteered to stay behind and handle the situation. They would contact the police, file a missing person report, and wait at the hotel. I led the remaining 24 guests to the airport and flew back to Hong Kong. Once we were home, the company began calling the emergency contact Mr. Tran had registered when he booked the tour months earlier. A woman answered. Our staff member explained who they were, then asked whether she had heard from Mr. Tran in the past day or two. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then the woman spoke, her voice confused. "Why are you calling me about him? A travel company? I don't understand." Mr. Tran died in a car accident several days before the trip was supposed to begin. He never went on that tour. Then she hung up. My manager described the feeling in that moment as the hair standing up on the back of his neck. After hearing this, we went back and checked everything. None of it made sense. I had personally taken roll of all 25 people when we departed from Hong Kong. I watched them board the plane. I counted again when we arrived. Mr. Tran was there. Quiet, yes. He tended to sit alone, but he was unmistakably present. He joined the group for meals, rode the tour bus, always choosing the window seat. He participated in every group activity. He was unfailingly polite, though he rarely spoke unless someone addressed him directly. When he did speak, his answers were brief, and I had assumed he was going through something difficult. People travel alone for all kinds of reasons. I gave him his space, and he appeared in the group photos, in every single one. My manager asked whether I might have miscounted from the beginning, whether perhaps Mr. Tran had never boarded at all. That was impossible. If a guest was missing, I was required to report it immediately. That was standard protocol. Beyond that, I wasn't the only one who had seen him. Every member of the group had seen him, spoken to him, interacted with him. And there was one more thing. The tip he had left me, real banknotes, was still sitting in my wallet when I arrived home. The Thai police became involved and checked the immigration records. That was when everything became even stranger. There was no record whatsoever, absolutely none, of Mr. Tran ever entering or leaving Thailand. Normally, as the guide, I pass through customs first. The guests follow behind, choosing whichever queue is shortest, and we regroup on the other side. Mr. Tran had gone through just like everyone else, but according to the official records, he had never been there. Yet he had been. The hotel staff remembered him, the other travelers remembered him. He had signed the group forms. He moved around, spoke, ate alongside us. He even stood for the group photo on the final evening of the trip. I still have that photo. His face is as clear as anyone else's, looking directly into the camera. So who, or what, was the man who came with us to Thailand? To this day, I have no answer. But he never caused any trouble, never made anyone uncomfortable. There was nothing malicious about him, only a quiet presence, as though he simply wanted to come along. And sometimes I wonder whether he truly was a ghost. Perhaps he had been looking forward to that trip so much. Perhaps it was something he had planned long before everything changed, and in his own silent way, he came anyway. One final journey before truly departing. On the subject of such things, I want to share one more story. This one isn't mine. It belongs to a colleague of mine named Benny. He used to work as a tour guide for a different company. Used to, because what happened to him shook him so deeply that he quit the profession entirely. It's been several years now, but to this day he still cannot talk about it for long. The memory clings to him like something cold and damp that he simply cannot shake off. Like my own story, he has never been able to explain what truly happened. At the time, Benny was leading a group from Hong Kong to Japan. Not to the big cities like Tokyo or Osaka. This was a remote, out-of-the-way region, the kind of place tourists rarely ever visit. Quiet, isolated, as though time had simply forgotten it existed. After landing, Benny took attendance, and the group boarded the tour bus for the drive to their hotel, a journey of several hours. Along the way, there was only one stop, about 10 minutes at a public restroom beside a narrow, winding road. This was nothing like the restrooms one might typically associate with Japan. The facility was old and crude. The stalls were separated by nothing more than wooden panels. There were no toilets, only holes cut into the floor, opened directly above a slow-moving river that ran beneath the structure. Everyone had 10 minutes to get off the bus, stretch their legs, use the facilities, and return. And they did. Benny counted heads before the bus moved on. Everyone was accounted for. The group continued on to the hotel. Upon arrival, Benny collected the room keys from the front desk and distributed them. The guests went upstairs to drop off their luggage and freshen up. 30 minutes later, they were to meet in the lobby for dinner. Half an hour passed. Nearly everyone had come back down, except for one couple. Benny waited an extra 5 minutes, then 10. Still no sign of them. He went upstairs and knocked on their door. No response. He assumed they had perhaps gone out to explore the surrounding area on their own. Not ideal, but it had happened before. The rest of the group went to dinner without them. When they returned to the hotel that evening, Benny checked the couple's room again. Still no one. The following morning, when they failed to appear at breakfast, concern had turned to alarm. Benny contacted hotel management and asked for the room to be opened. The door swung wide. What was inside made no sense whatsoever. The couple's 2 suitcases stood neatly just inside the doorway, but the 2 beds had not been touched. Sheets still flat, pillows still straight, as though no one had ever actually entered the room. Benny opened one of the suitcases to check. All of the clothing inside was still folded exactly as it had been packed, as though it had never been disturbed, as though they had never truly been there at all. And yet they clearly had. They had taken the room keys directly from Benny's hands. They had climbed the stairs with their luggage. There was no other option. Benny had to call the local police. A missing tourist is a serious matter, and reporting it was mandatory. The officers arrived and began their investigation, asking the standard questions. Where had the group stopped along the way? What was the last location where the couple had been seen? Benny told them, "We only stopped once at that restroom out on the road, but I saw them here at the hotel last night when I handed out the keys. They took them from me themselves and walked upstairs." The police took note of that roadside stop, hours away. They sent officers to investigate. When the officers opened one of those rickety wooden stalls at that restroom, they found the couple dead. The police did not disclose the cause of death. They only confirmed that the 2 individuals were members of the tour group. But here is what makes it all so unbearable to sit with. That couple had gotten back on the bus. They had been present during the head count. They had accepted their room keys. They had carried their own suitcases up the stairs. So when, exactly, had their bodies come to be left behind in that restroom? Had they somehow returned to that restroom after already checking into the hotel, sneaking out in the night, traveling hours back to a random spot in the middle of the forest road? But why? And how could they have left the hotel without anyone at the front desk noticing? It was a small, old property with only one entrance and exit, staffed around the clock. Because of its age, there were no security cameras. No way to verify whether they had truly walked in or not, but everyone had seen them. There were no answers. Only more questions that made the skin crawl. Benny never led another tour after that. And honestly, I don't blame him one bit. Story number 2. My name is Chloe, and I want to tell you something that happened to me a few years ago. An experience that still drifts through my mind to this day like a shadow I cannot seem to shake. It happened in the autumn of 2021, when I was still working as a real estate agent in Hong Kong. I remember the air had begun to turn cool, the days growing shorter. That time of year when sunset seems to arrive a little earlier than expected, and the whole city becomes somehow quieter, a little lonelier. Before I get into the story itself, I want to make one thing clear. I am not someone who believes in superstition. I have walked through hundreds, perhaps thousands of apartments, both occupied ones and those that had been sitting empty for years. I have seen all kinds of things and met all kinds of people. Nothing had ever truly unsettled me. But this one is different. To this day, I still don't know what to make of it. I've told friends and family, hoping someone could offer a rational explanation. But every time I revisit what happened that evening, the whole thing only seems stranger. It all started with a favor. My aunt owned an apartment in an older building not far from my office. She had been renting it to the same couple for over 20 years, a quiet pair who had moved in when they were in their 40s and stayed all the way through to the edge of retirement. They were packing up now, preparing to move to Canada to be closer to their children. My aunt asked me to help her find new tenants. The place was dated, not terrible, but you could feel the years soaked into every corner. The kind of apartment that still faintly smelled of incense and old floorboards, where the paint had been refreshed a few times but had never quite managed to conceal the decades of life lived inside. We thought a modest renovation would make it more appealing to prospective tenants, particularly young couples or small families. Because my office was nearby, I would drop by every few days to check on the renovation progress. It became almost routine. Go up, take a few photos, update my aunt, head back. I had been up there perhaps 20 times. Nothing had ever felt strange about the place. If anything, the apartment had a certain stillness to it. Quiet, unremarkable, perfectly ordinary. Until one afternoon. It was a weekday. I remember because I had been thinking about how quickly the sky was darkening. The horizon had already begun to bleed into that deep, burnt orange of autumn. I received a call from a man who had found the listing online. He was polite and well-spoken. He wanted to view the apartment that same day, around 4 p.m. Perfectly normal. We arranged to meet at the building entrance. When I arrived, he was already waiting, and he had brought a woman with him. I assumed she was his wife. They looked like two middle-aged professionals. The man was in a neat checked shirt with chinos. The woman was dressed smartly, with the kind of put-together air that suggested finance or law. As it turned out, my instinct wasn't far off. She worked at a bank just down the street and had come during her lunch break to view the apartment before heading back to the office. It was already 4 p.m., I noted silently. A very late lunch break. We went up together. The woman moved through the apartment with careful attention. Every light fitting, every cabinet. She was methodical, deliberate, asking thoughtful questions. To the eye of a real estate agent, this was exactly what you hoped to see. It usually signals a serious buyer. I stood near the entrance, giving them space to look around while I scrolled through my phone. After a while, the man came over and struck up a conversation. He explained that they weren't a couple. The woman was his sister, and she was searching for a place to live because she was going through a divorce. I kept my expression neutral and didn't press further. These things happen. About 40 minutes later, they said they had seen enough and would discuss it with the family before deciding whether to come back for a second look. A completely ordinary viewing, nothing worth noting. It was fully dark by the time I returned to the office. Around 6:30. The sky had gone a deep navy blue and the streets were quieting. I was getting ready to go home, already thinking about a hot shower and a delivery order. Just as I was reversing out of the car park, my phone rang. It was the same man from earlier. He said his sister wanted to come back for another look. Right now, this time with the family. I paused. Right now? I asked. It was already dark. Wouldn't it make more sense to come back during the day? But he told me they were already standing outside the building. I'll be honest. I was a little thrown off, but I didn't want to turn them away. Business is business. They seemed eager and serious. Maybe they were ready to sign on the spot. I exhaled, turned the car around, and drove back. This time when I arrived, the man and the woman were waiting with a third person, a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wearing the uniform of a nearby girl's primary school. She was pressed close against her mother, shy and reluctant, half her body tucked behind the woman's back. I noticed immediately that she was murmuring something. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was frightened. I smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Don't be scared," I said to her. "We're just looking at an apartment. Maybe this will be your new home." She didn't respond, only looked away and continued whispering to herself. In the lift, she kept murmuring to her mother, saying she was scared, repeating it in a small, barely audible voice, almost as though she were talking to herself alone. The mother and the uncle said nothing, not a single word. We went in. I switched on the lights. I opened the windows to let in some air, then stepped back to give them room and retreated to the kitchen to wait. The mother went straight out to the balcony, as if she already knew exactly where she was headed. The little girl, meanwhile, suddenly took off running through the apartment, giggling, darting from room to room, completely transformed from the timid child who had been clinging to her mother downstairs. I found it strange. A few minutes ago she had been paralyzed with fear, and now she was running around as though she had always lived here. Kids, I told myself. Maybe she just needed a moment to warm up. I stayed in the kitchen, but after a while curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out, and what I saw was deeply unsettling. The woman was standing on the balcony, holding the little girl in her arms, but the way she was holding her was wrong. Arms stiff, unnaturally rigid, lifting the child in front of her in a way that felt deeply off. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, she began to turn on the spot. Rotating to the right, the child held out before her, like someone doing a panoramic sweep. No phone, no camera in her hands. Just that slow, empty, deliberate rotation. As though she were scanning the view with nothing at all. The girl murmured something to her mother, then squirmed to get down. The moment her feet touched the floor, she bolted for the front door, running at full speed as though trying to escape. The mother ran after her. Then the uncle. I was left alone. No goodbye, no explanation. They were simply gone. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. I wasn't exactly frightened, but my nerves were stretched. I composed myself, closed the windows, switched off the lights, and locked the door. When I stepped out into the corridor, they were waiting in front of the lift. None of them looked at me. No one spoke. We rode down in total silence. Then, from the corner of the lift, the little girl whispered again, "I'm scared." By that point, I had grown irritated with the whole thing. I asked her directly, "What are you scared of?" She slowly turned to look at me, raised one small hand to cover her mouth, and giggled. I didn't know what was happening, but everything about the moment made my skin crawl. At the ground floor lobby, the man offered no explanation. He simply said, "We'll be in touch," and left in a hurry. It was 7 p.m. On the drive home, I couldn't stop turning it all over in my mind. The strange behavior, the silence, the laughter, the way the woman had held the child on the balcony. I couldn't set it aside. I needed some kind of answer. I decided to call the man back while driving, on Bluetooth. No matter how many times I tried, the call would not connect. Strange. I had spoken to him on that very number just hours earlier. I told myself perhaps he was playing some game to negotiate the rent. Just go home and sleep. Deal with it tomorrow. But the next day, he didn't call. I tried again. Same result. The number was simply unreachable. I had no idea what to make of it. I considered that maybe they had decided not to rent and simply didn't want to say so directly. But I couldn't reach them at all. It was as though the number had never existed. A few days later, I told my aunt about the family. She went quiet for a moment. Then she told me something that made the blood drain from my face. A few years earlier, a tragedy had taken place in that very building. 2 floors directly above my aunt's apartment. Same layout. Same floor plan. A middle-aged woman, somewhere in her 40s or 50s, had moved in with her young daughter. She was going through a divorce. From what my aunt knew, she had been struggling, not just emotionally but financially. Depression had taken hold of her. She did everything she could to hold things together for her daughter's sake. But everything was clearly falling apart. One evening, she picked her daughter up from school and the two of them went out for dinner together. Just the two of them, a simple meal. Perhaps an attempt to find a moment of normalcy, or one last quiet hour of peace. They came home at around 7 p.m. The little girl was still in her school uniform. The moment they stepped inside the apartment, the mother gently told her daughter to go out to the balcony and look at the night view. The lights blinking from surrounding buildings, the stream of traffic far below, a moment that should have been gentle, even beautiful. She lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her close. Then, without a word of warning, she threw the child from the balcony. And immediately after, she jumped. The woman's younger brother was the one who had helped her move into that apartment. He had found the place for her. He had tried everything he could to be by her side through the darkest days. But the weight of guilt, the sheer unbearable weight of everything that had happened, broke him. 1 week later, he took his own life. It was a story I had never heard until after my own strange encounter. I still don't fully understand why my aunt hadn't told me before. When she finished, I stood completely still, and then a thought arrived. One I haven't been able to let go of since. The family I had shown around the apartment that evening, a woman going through a divorce, a little girl in a primary school uniform, a younger brother doing his best to help his sister through the hardest period of her life. Just a coincidence? Or was something darker still drifting through the hallways of that building? To this day, I still don't know what I experienced that night, but I know one thing. It did not feel like a coincidence. Story number 3. Hannah was an office worker at an IT company. Because she lived quite far from work, she drove herself every day. The job kept her busy enough that she often didn't leave the office until 10 o'clock at night. And on the worst days, when the work piled up without mercy, she wouldn't make it home until the early hours of the morning. On her familiar route home, there was one stretch she always had to pass through, a narrow back alley, barely wide enough for 2 cars to squeeze past each other. It was a blind spot, secluded and eerily silent after dark. Right in the middle of that alley, at the base of a power pole, there were always fresh flowers and sweets laid out on the ground. Hannah had heard bits and pieces through word of mouth that a fatal traffic accident had occurred at that exact spot some years earlier. The driver responsible had not been charged with dangerous driving and, as a first-time offender, had received only a suspended sentence before being released. What made the alley truly frightening was this. Night after night, right beside that power pole, the figure of a woman could be seen standing alone. Her limbs were twisted at wrong angles. Her skull was split open. Her entire body was soaked in blood. She stood with her head bowed low, her posture radiating a deep, festering resentment. From the very first time Hannah saw her, she knew immediately this was no injured person. The woman's body was translucent and faint, unmistakably a soul from the other side. Hannah had been born with a powerful sixth sense, and she had grown up seeing things that didn't belong to the living world. Her grandmother had warned her long ago, if you ever see the dead, never speak to them and never look them in the eyes. So Hannah always followed that rule. Every night she drove past, she kept her gaze forward and pretended to see nothing at all. Judging by the figure's silhouette, Hannah guessed the woman had been around 20 years old, about the same age as herself. Long hair fell over the ghost's face, making it impossible to see her features clearly. Rain or bone-chilling winter nights made no difference. The figure was always there, standing beside the power pole without fail. Hannah thought to herself that this girl must have died suddenly in the accident, leaving behind feelings too heavy to release. How pitiful. Is she really going to stand there alone forever, with no one to care? Her grandmother had warned her never to feel sympathy for a spirit, but the compassion inside Hannah grew quietly. And one night it finally won out. She decided she would speak to the ghost. If she could be someone willing to listen, perhaps the girl could unburden herself and finally find peace. Hannah pulled her car to a stop beside the power pole, rolled down the window and spoke. "Hey, do you want to get in? I can take you for a ride." The female spirit was still for a long moment. Then she slowly drifted closer, passed clean through the car door, and settled into the passenger seat. Hana began to drive, keeping the speed gentle and unhurried. "I'm sorry for startling you like this," Hana said. "You must not have been expecting it. The truth is, I've noticed you here for a while now. You looked so lonely. I couldn't just keep driving past. If you want to talk, I'm here." The woman said nothing. Her head remained bowed, her face still hidden. Hana kept trying, asking gentle questions to draw her out. "How old are you? What's your name? How long have you been here?" No matter how much Hana coaxed, the spirit stayed rigid and silent, lips pressed shut without a single word in reply. Thinking that a longer drive might help ease the spirit's mood, Hana didn't turn toward her apartment. Instead, she kept driving through the quiet night streets, continuing to try to reach the presence beside her. Then something shifted as the car reached the main road. A low, trembling sound, broke the silence. Hana glanced over and saw the woman shaking, a choked sob spilling out of her. "Why? I didn't want to die. Why? It wasn't my fault. None of it was my fault." The words came out in a frail, barely there whisper. Hana's heart ached for her, a young woman with so much life ahead of her, erased in an instant by a cruel and senseless accident. A grief like that, she thought, couldn't be measured. What could she possibly say that wouldn't sound hollow? The car came to a stop at a red light. Hana steadied herself and spoke. "I can't do much for you, but I want you to know it wasn't your fault. I'm certain of that." All at once, the spirit lifted her head and looked directly at Hana. It was a face beyond recognition. The flesh was crushed and mangled, deep crimson from what must have been a devastating impact. Hana forced herself not to flinch, not to let the horror show on her face. "Really?" the spirit asked, in a voice that came out for the very first time. "Do you mean that?" Hana nodded. "Yes, I mean it. It definitely wasn't your fault. So if there's anything you need to say, anything at all, let it out. I'll stay with you all night if I have to. I've got the day off tomorrow anyway." The light turned green. Hana drove on. "Thank you," the spirit whispered. "Thank you so much. I've been waiting so long to hear someone say that." And then, the moment those grateful, trembling words were finished, something in the woman changed completely. She began to scream. "That's right, it wasn't my fault. It was that little brat's fault. He threw himself in front of my car out of nowhere. A kid like that deserved what he got. He deserved to die." The blood in Hana's veins seemed to freeze solid. Her hands shook so badly she could barely keep hold of the wheel. The woman raged on. "Because of him, everyone called me a murderer. I lost my job. My fiancé left me. My own family turned their backs on me. I had nowhere left to go, no reason left to live." Her ruined face twisted further in fury. "That's why I had to die. I hated this world so much that I jumped from a rooftop. Because everyone denied me. Everyone blamed me. I had no other choice." Hana couldn't bear it any longer. Her throat was completely dry. She pulled the car sharply to the side of the road and stopped. Slowly, she turned to look at the thing sitting in the passenger seat. "I waited so long," the spirit said, her voice dropping again into something almost tender. "Waited for someone who could forgive me, someone who could accept me right there in that spot. Meeting you, I'm truly so happy." And then she was gone. Hana sat motionless in the driver's seat, her back pressed against the headrest, her mind spinning. She should have looked into the accident before she ever opened her mouth. Because the victim in that alley, the one who had died, was a child. And this woman was not the one who had been struck by a car. She was the one behind the wheel. She had escaped prison, but the weight of public condemnation had eventually crushed her, and she had taken her own life out of bitterness. It's said that spirits who carry hatred and rage are the ones who can never move on, and this woman was living proof of that. Hana understood now that she had walked into something far beyond her ability to control. She drove home in exhaustion. When she stepped into her dark apartment and flipped on the living room light, the woman was standing right in front of her. Hana screamed, and the figure vanished instantly. The next day, Hana went to a nearby temple to ask for an exorcism ritual. The head monk looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. The resentment this woman carries is too heavy. It has already attached itself to you, and it will be very difficult to drive away. What you said, telling her that it wasn't her fault, was a fatal mistake. She was rejected by the entire world, so now she sees you as the only person who has ever understood her. She has become completely dependent on you. People like you, with your sensitivity, must never make promises to a spirit or offer comfort so carelessly. The only path forward, the monk told her, was to pray for the woman's peace every single day without interruption. And this was not a matter of months. It was years, possibly a lifetime, with no guarantee that the spirit would ever find rest. From that point on, Hana's life became something close to hell. She always felt eyes watching her from every corner of every room, strange footsteps, bloody handprints appearing on the walls. Every night as she slept, the woman would press her ruined face close to Hana's and whisper things, words that were never quite clear enough to make out. That was several years ago. From what people say, Hana eventually quit her job, gave up her apartment, and vanished entirely from contact with everyone she knew. No one knows where she is now. No one knows what she is still living through. Story number 4. This is a story from a period in my life when I was urgently looking for a part-time job. I had been focusing my search on office work, and one day I came across a job listing for an administrative position at a small real estate company, only about 10 minutes away by bus. The working conditions, hours, and salary were all exactly what I had been hoping for, so I went to the interview feeling genuinely optimistic and full of energy. The interview was held at the company's own office. The moment I stepped inside, the very first thing that struck me was how dark it was. The lights were clearly on, and the room wasn't in a position that would lack natural light. And yet, somehow, the atmosphere inside felt dim and oppressive in a way that made no sense. A strange, suffocating darkness that had no obvious cause. There was something else that bothered me just as much. An odor. A deeply strange smell that seemed to hang in the air throughout the entire space. If you asked me to describe what it was, I genuinely couldn't tell you, because it was unlike anything I had ever encountered in my life. The closest I can say is that it was foul, unpleasant in a way that settled in the back of your throat, and yet none of the employees working there seemed to notice it at all. No one wrinkled their nose, no one shifted uncomfortably. They had either grown completely used to it, or something had simply switched off their ability to register it. The person who interviewed me was a middle-aged man with an open, friendly manner of speaking. But that cheerfulness felt like a shell, because his face told a different story entirely. He spoke in a tone that strained toward brightness, yet his features were gaunt and hollow, worn down with a weariness that looked as though it had been accumulating for a very long time. I was partway through the interview when I noticed something wrong. From behind a tall shelving unit pushed against the wall at the far end of the office, someone was staring at me. They had concealed the left half of their body behind the shelf, leaving only the right half visible, and that half was turned directly toward me, eyes fixed and unmoving. It was a middle-aged woman. Her skin was the color of white wax. She was dressed entirely in white, from head to toe. Her long black hair hung loose and limp all the way down to her waist. Her eyes were opened as wide as they could physically go, locked onto me without blinking. I was in the middle of an interview, and I tried my hardest to stay composed, to keep my attention on the man sitting across from me, but the image of her kept forcing itself back into my field of vision. I could not look away from her for long, no matter how hard I tried. Then I noticed her lips had begun to move, slowly, repeatedly, forming the same shape over and over. I watched the movement of her mouth and gradually pieced together what she was saying. The same word, repeated again and again in a loop. Leave. 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 Her presence unsettled me so completely that I lost all ability to focus on anything the interviewer was saying. Eventually, I came up with some excuse to cut the interview short, apologized, and made to leave. The instant I said so, the man's expression shifted in a way I hadn't seen coming. Something in his face went very still, very serious. He looked at me, then slowly raised a hand and pointed directly at the shelving unit where the woman was standing. "Don't tell me," he said in a voice that made my spine go cold. "You can see that thing, can't you?" I turned and looked back at the shelf. The woman was gone, no trace of her, as though she had simply ceased to exist. And as I stared at the shelf in her absence, something else hit me. The unit was pushed flush against the wall behind it. Completely flush, without so much as a gap or a shadow of space between them. There was nowhere for a person to stand. No recess, no hollow, nothing. A human body could not have fit there. After that day, the company reached out and invited me to come in for a second interview. I declined without hesitation. Less than a year later, I heard that a small fire had broken out at that real estate office, injuring several people. Shortly after, the company went bankrupt and shut down for good. To this day, I still don't know what that woman was. I don't know whether she was trying to warn me to drive me away from a place that was heading toward disaster, or whether she herself was the omen, the dark thing that had already taken root there. I'm not sure I'll ever know.